To me, got it. To me, it was growing up in a warm, Hamish environment. We certainly did not speak of the war every day. We were brought up with love, true happiness, Yiddishkeit, and the love of Eretz Yisrael. My father worked 2 jobs to send us to yeshiva day school. This opportunity to acknowledge both our parents' hard work and dedication to enable this education and who we are today because of it. However, I would say for me, being second generation was formative for my identity. We lived side by side with it. There were lots of quirks that were definitely idiosyncratic, that word, of survivors. One example was my grandmother would come to babysit and put ceramic plates on the windowsills. So if someone would break in, we would hear. Unfortunately, these days, my dad isn't able to express himself fully. My dad was always on the quieter side. When it came to the topic of the war, I think there were 2 reasons we didn't get to hear you speak. Firstly, our Zaida, my father's father, our grandfather Chaim, spoke to us. He lived with us for 10 years. I was always interested in life before the war, and Zaida lived in our house as we grew up. We sang Zmirot Shabbat and learned to read the Yiddish, and I learned to read the Yiddish newspaper with him. We engaged him and he promptly responded. In a way, this overshadowed my father. The second reason, my father was born in Przemysl in Poland on January 15th, 1939. He was truly a very young child of 4 when in hiding. So in a way, skipped over as if he didn't have enough to say, enough of a memory of what occurred. When I asked him to tell me, he said, I don't know if I know because I know or because I heard people tell the story. He did tell me that he recalls darkness and dampness from the hiding place. I often wonder, what does it mean to carry your Holocaust story within you throughout your life without being heard? This picture is actually a later picture of we don't have many pictures actually at all of my father from when he was living. We have maybe like we have maybe make 2 pictures because they ran. And so the pictures that we have are actually right post-war. This is the arrow is pointing to my dad. I found it online at the Ghetto Fighters Museum. My grandfather in the 1980s gave in a whole series of pictures and I found them online and he gave in all the information about them. I've been there as well. And this was I found my father. He's about 7 years old here and it's in a refugee camp in Italy. So my grandmother, who I'm named for, Sarah, is in the top left of the picture. And this picture is a precious picture. It was also just given to me a few years ago. It was given to me by my cousin David Sperling in Washington. His grandfather is the handsome man standing in the back with erect and tall in between the other ladies. And he left for America early on. And in 1935, just before the war, he came back for a visit. And this was the last shot of the family. He went back to America and he's the one who actually sponsored my grandparents and my father, which we'll get to later, when they came into the United States. My grandmother, Sarah, is the only one who survived this picture. Everyone else was murdered in Belzec. And one sister actually here died in Przemysl in the ghetto. They lived in Przemysl. That was a city, I'll show you in a second, on the border. You may have heard it a lot these days. Actually, it was an unknown place until maybe a month ago or 6 weeks ago when the war broke out in Ukraine, but now it is a known place and a lot of refugees are flooding to there. My grandparents were married in 1937. My grandfather, though, was not from Przemysl. He was from a place called in Jazov. If you can, I don't know if you can see it on the map. You can see that it's not so far. You can see that Przemysl was on the border when the Germans and the Russians divided up in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. When they divided up the Poland between them, initially the border went actually in the middle of Przemysl and the Sans River. So one side went under the Germans and one side went under the Russians. And so my grandparents were under, the first 2 years were under the Russians, thankfully, until 1941. That's the area you can see where it is as far as in Poland South, not far from Lvov, which is in the Ukraine today. And the closest city would be Krakow. Okay. And also just to say that Joseph was a very small shtetl. There were mostly Jews, and there were only 300 Jews in that shtetl. But my grandfather served in the Polish army, and when he's going to, I actually interviewed him when I was 19, and I decided that it would be better for him to tell you the story than me. And he discusses right before this that he went into the Polish army as regular mandated army duty, and when he got out in 1935, he worked as a salesman for a big chocolate factory. He traveled around Europe from Lvov, from Lemberg. Life went on. He gets married in 1937, and in 1939, with AIDS, and then he's called up right before he's mobilized near the area of Krakow, and right before what was I going to say? Sorry, I lost my thing. Right before the war broke out, they were mobilized, and then not so long afterwards, 5,000 prisoners of war, Polish prisoners of war, fall into the hands of the Germans, and he's amongst them. And they realized, the Jews amongst them, that they must escape because they were taken to a POW camp and they would not survive. And they do. And this is the point where he talks about, where it's going to pick up on. He's going to say that he arranged. I asked him, how did you manage to do that? And he says, we were able to get some help and bribe an Austrian, I guess someone from an Austrian soldier. He was a German Austrian, and that's where he discusses it.
Sarah, are there technical difficulties?
Zev, can you hear me?
Everyone can hear you.
Oh, okay. What? First of all, your video is not on. Oh, it is on.
Just turn it off.
What's the problem? Explain to me and I'll tell you what to do.
Okay, this isn't supposed to be very random, but okay, one second.
Is the PowerPoint presentation open on the desktop?
I got it.
Open the PowerPoint presentation. Now do start screaming. No, fantastic. Rosetta, that's fine. Leave it like that. They won't be able to hear. People can't hear the video. The video will be sent again afterwards. The rest of the thing they'll be able to hear Sarah speak. So just say something so we can hear. We can hear you.
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the disturbance. Go ahead.
I was like the. It's already after the war, like in 1944. So just when we cut out, I just wanted to say, just when we cut out, my grandfather was actually saying the only like 2 sentences that he said about the time that they were in the ghetto. I also cut him off. I was 19 when I interviewed him, and I also cut him off to ask him a question, and I never got back to asking him more about the time that they were in hiding. But he just said that, and so for actually all the years, even though I interviewed him and I asked him a lot of questions and all, we only knew that we had no name of a rescuer. We only knew that there were 16 Jews, that they were the 3 of the 16, that they were in hiding, that my grandfather sent them out, my father and my grandmother ahead of himself, and only before the last big action that he got himself into the hiding. And that is really all we knew. We knew nothing. And he actually did say to us that the hiding place was close to the ghetto. And in 1979, when he goes back with my father, he writes it in his book that I have here as well. And again, 2 sentences for the 2 years that they were in hiding. It was very, very, and that was it. So I was always a bit intrigued about what I didn't know. And I always looked on Google. I always searched, every once in a while I would search 16 Jews, Shemesh, rescuers, but other people's stories came up and nothing came up. Really nothing ever came up. So last year during Corona, I was in a J Roots course with Svi, and she's J Roots, and there was about a 6-month program, and we had about 4 hours of studying a week, and we were preparing to become guides in Poland, Jewish guides in Poland, educational guides. And a lot of times afterwards, I needed to wind down. It's 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I need to wind down. I can't just go to sleep. And one of those days, about last January, I called my mom and I said, I don't know why, but I said to her, are you sure there's nothing else we remember, about anything about the hiding place? And then she said, well, I remember one thing. And this was really the key for me to unravel a lot of this mystery, which I didn't know at the time. She said, I remember that Zaida, my grandfather, said that the man who rescued them married one of the Jewish women that he saved, and moved to New Zealand. Well, I didn't know anybody in New Zealand except for one person whose father was also from the same Bjuz of the same town as my grandfather. And I knew she had a srita from the war, like she was a stand-up comedian about it, and she did all this kind of stuff. So I knew, and she was about 15 years older than me. So I figured if anybody maybe heard a story, maybe she would have known something. So I contacted her, and she said to me, "Why don't you write the Holocaust Museum in New Zealand?" I really didn't give it any hope. I'll get to it in a second. Okay. And I didn't give it any hope. And I don't know if you can see this here. But so I decided to write. And of course, the first thing they write me is, "Thank you for contacting us. I'd like to know the name or the year it was awarded." This is very difficult to follow up on. I got it. But then the other thing I saw came in, and it came in from home. And they said, "Hi, Sarah, I want to volunteer extra." And we went. And then, yeah, he did the show that. Here's my father. You can still, but there is no hope in them. My mother was so I never drew I pieced together something. How did you know that eventually we ended up in the museum? Mom, which is how I think hard for me to and here, and there's I took a screenshot. There, that was like the first time we met. And then a few days later, I met, that's Eva. And so she's the daughter of Vladimir and Rivka, Renee. And then a few days later, I met George. He lives in Australia and she lives in New Zealand. I just want to go back for a second before I go on. And this was a picture right after the war of my grandparents and my father. But I have to say that my mom sent a letter, and it was wrapped, like it was in an envelope and in tinfoil. So I just took it and stuck it in a drawer and really didn't pay attention to it. And by chance, literally, I don't remember if it was right before or right after this whole thing happened, I opened the letter. Now, I've gone through since then a lot of my grandfather's papers. There was nothing else about this. But this letter says, I had to translate it from Polish. "My dears, 3 months have passed since the Red Army liberated us from the evil hands of the Nazi murderous bandits. Until now, I could not write to you as I did not have any information on your brother. Now he's writing to a friend in Switzerland who was from his shtetl, who had left, who wanted to know what happened to his family. Now I'm in the unfortunate position to inform you with deep despair that he was killed together with many others in the ghetto in September of 1943, when the last of the ghetto was liquidated. I myself, my wife and child were rescued by miracle. I was unable to write to you from my hiding place. Only a handful of us have survived, something like 350 to 450 Jews in all of the area that was liberated here. You can imagine for yourselves the totality of the devastation of the massacre. The details of what these murderers have done will come to light when the war ends. If you have the possibility, I would like to ask for myself, my wife, and child some clothes. He's 6 years old now. I too await your reply. Warm regards, Chaim Feingold. P.S. If you're able to send food, that wouldn't hurt." And so Eva sent me a list that she had. I didn't have names. I had nothing, but Eva did. She had the name of Meyer Dornbush. I can't even see from here. Regina, a name of there that says, I'm going to go with you. Sarah Max, and so many folks. So what happened? I had cousins immediately to Washington, and friend Poland together. We opened the cabin, and there was no tomorrow. We had to be in there. It was like, maybe it's also and we were searching. We had a couple of things. So ancestry, a whole number of websites. And I think it was very proud. And she said, yes, that was incredible. There's a video, but that video has a cousin, and we have a project, and she's 21 years old, and she's survived. And Sarah, that's a Galicianity. That's a Polish. It was. For a while, it was a lot of it was really a lot of detective work with a lot of people together. And here you can see it. It didn't switch. Oh wait, no, because I'm switching from. Okay, let's see. They didn't have to do this. Yeah. So you can see even old, there were lists not only of websites, but also there were a list right after the war. The Jewish community actually had a Pinkas Nitzolim that people came together. So they even had the name. I found my grandfather's name, Chaim Feingold, Sarah, and Dov, and where they lived in Poland, like in Przemysl, right after the war, they came and listed, and I found everybody. I found Chuper, I found all of them. So here's the excitement of, this was the first Zoom that we had, where the older lady, Rose, on the left with her granddaughter, Emma, and she's the cousin who was in London. And she said in a very little voice, very, very sweet, yes, I have a cousin, Chuper, Tobias. Their name is Chuper, but they changed it to Cooper. So we had to find Cooper, and they're in Chicago. It was like really, and it was like, okay. And then in Chicago, I said I knew a few people on Facebook. I could find them, and they, in the end, she was in Florida. It was like it really was like that. And so the first meeting was myself and this woman and my sister in a car somewhere, I don't know, my mother in her office, and everyone in Washington and in London. And then this was the very first meeting of the Rishko survivor families from New Zealand, USA, and England. Her father. The rescuer. Is that me? Okay. I just wanted to stop it for a second to explain that the woman who's speaking, Amelia, both her parents were in the hideout, and she was born right after they were liberated. So there were actually two pregnant ladies in the hideout. George, who was born on July 5th, 1944, and they were liberated on July 27th, 1944. So Eva, they told me that their mother would tell them that once she was ready to go give birth, there was fighting. The Russians and the Germans were fighting, and she kept saying she didn't know she would make it, actually, not only because of the childbirth, but because of the situation and not being bombed on. And I kept thinking what an absurd situation it is that this woman who's married to the rescuer, a Jewish woman, is giving birth to a Jewish child in Nazi-occupied Poland. It just, in the middle of the war, the whole thing is just so crazy. And then the second is Amelia. She's her parents. She's born right after the war as well, and her parents were both there as well. She was telling in the beginning that, there are a lot of these things are, there are a lot of, I guess they're not smooth all the time. And what I mean by that is that she was saying that her mother had a twin sister who didn't agree to stay and marry the rescuer, and didn't survive afterwards. So things weren't, there was a lot of gray lines on a lot of it. But it was such an unbelievable moment. This was actually shot at, I was in my pajamas. It was actually shot at like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. I had started searching in the morning, and it just kept unraveling. And so we have someone from Washington and someone from New Zealand. And my mom's actually on the left in the car. She had been food shopping that day and left everything in the supermarket. All the carts were left in the supermarket, and she left it all and went to Zoom And Amelia, actually, I caught her off guard somewhere in Florida. And I call her up right before we get on this. And I say to her, Amelia, my name is Sara Wolf. Her daughter-in-law had spoken to her and had warned her, but I said, we're all waiting for you. And she says, who? I say, all of the Rishko survivors, I found them all, and you're the last, and we're waiting for you. And she was like, oh my God, I don't believe it. Like she said, and then she came on, and it turns out that and so there's London, there's Florida, there's everyone on here is really very crazy.
Everything that could go wrong is going wrong.
They're cousins.
Hi, Ayala, how are you? Good, Baruch Hashem.
Okay, I'll stop it here. So it turns out that Amelia, who's speaking in the pink, who was talking, and the lady above her, the older lady, they're actually cousins. So that's the other thing. So this was the first. That was like the crazy really a crazy day. And I'm gonna go on. Sorry, I want to go on to this. And so then I got pictures of family. On the left is Vladimir. I think that's the Zoom. That's Vladimir Rishko on the left. This is the rescuer. And on the right is a picture of Vladimir and Renee, or Rivka, and her brother, and Eva and George. And Eva always told me that she grew up with a lot of trauma. She said that her mother always felt, despite the fact that her father, they saved her and all, she felt always guilty for marrying out. And also when they got to New Zealand, she said that they were not welcomed by the Jewish community there because they were mixed marriage. And so she said it was like very hard for them to even, they lived with the mother's trauma and also the continuation so it was not so simple for them. And that's their family, the George and Ava, the rescue. Sorry, my picture's a little out of order here. So I wanted a couple of pictures here from, this is a picture already in the refugee camp from my father's time already in Italy. As you heard before, they make it all the way to Italy through many countries. They were planning to come here, but my grandmother was very sick and the war broke out, and my grandfather's brothers said, don't come here. It's not a place for a sick lady. And in fact, she did pass away on the operating table in 1964. I'm named for her. I carry her name. And so, but my father always said that his childhood began in Italy at the age of 6. And if you look, this is a picture of it says on the top in Hebrew, the Talmidei Sherit HaPlita, right? How do you say Sherit HaPlita in English? Even when I just hear the word, I find it very emotional in Italy. And he's in the front. And this is actually another picture in the refugee camp. You can see that they definitely look like refugee children. It feels like it's a National Geographic picture. And actually, crazy story is that I searched out that other little boy, and it turns out that that little boy, in the end of 1960s, early 1970s, there was an attack in Nahariya by the Fatah. His family was murdered actually, and he made Aliyah with his family, and he passed away only last year. I was trying to find him, but he passed away last year. But I said there was an article in Ma'ariv, and I found the whole thing about him. And so I just thought it's worthy just to say that they were sponsored by cousins that I mentioned early on, by cousins in the United States. And I thought this was so moving when they had to show tax returns. They had to show that they would support the refugees. It took about 6 years for them to actually, from the time of I found it actually almost outrageous, from the time that they applied to immigrate from the refugee camps into the United States, it took between 5 and 6 years for them to actually be able to go on their way. And this is one of the things that it says here. Mrs. Sperling, which is the cousin, has indicated that she and her husband have lost all of their relatives abroad, and that Chaim and his wife, Sarah, are the only surviving relatives. They appear to be extremely interested in planning for the banks and have probably given it some thought. Mrs. Sperling told us that Mr. Bank had previously been in business and that eventually they hoped to set the banks up in their own businesses in the United States. The government was, of course, worried that people wouldn't support themselves, right? So that was the economic factor. However, they've been able to secure employment for Chaim as an apprentice machine operator. The banks will be housed by Mr. and Mrs. Sperling. Mr. and Mrs. Sperling have a very large 3 1/2 room apartment. The Sperlings plan to give the banks their bedroom. When I read that, I found this, by the way, in YIVO in Manhattan, in the YIVO in the archives. And when I read that, I just thought, like, wow. The Sperlings plan to give the banks their bedroom, and they themselves will sleep in the living room. They expect, however, to eventually purchase their own home, which they plan to share with the banks. Mr. and Mrs. Sperling are quite secure financially. Mr. Sperling is a part-time owner of a liquor store. They are the only close relatives of the banks in the United States. I thought that was very moving. This was a lot of work just to find, when we didn't have the names of some of the people, I didn't say, but we didn't have last names for the people who were in hiding. And so my friend Lukasz in Poland, he actually sat weeks and drew out the names, and he figured out who it was. And so when I told you this morning that we met Avinoam Rauch, it was his family that Lukasz was able to find without having a last name. He had literally what you see, Sam, Fran, like he figured it out by a testimonial he had seen once in Przemysl, because he's from there and he knows that area well. And a lot of, I did some Yad Vashem work, he did a lot of leg work, and he mapped it all out. It was like, and then the 3 brothers, my grandfather in the middle at my wedding. The brother on the left survived Mauthausen, was born in 1917, made Aliyah, and he lived here. And the brother on the right came in 1935 with the Aliyah of the Gordonia youth movement. And the lady on the right, she's still alive. She's 101, but she was born in Cyprus, my aunt. and the lady on the left was actually fought in the Warsaw Ghetto. So kind of like, I feel like I don't think I knew an adult, except maybe my mom technically because she's second generation, but she was born in Santo Domingo. I don't think we had anyone who wasn't a survivor in our family. So it was just a different way of, and it was just different. And that's my dad and my sister and myself when we were little. And so my dad, always the one who held all the babies, and down in archives in Yivo, and in Italy, we did a family trip to Italy. And I will say that from one little boy that Vladimir Rishko saved is a whole tribe of 15 grandchildren. And I think that that's testimony of what the power of the righteous Gentile, of what he did, and what it meant for our family. And just to end off with the words of my grandfather, it's from his trip when he went in 1979. At the end of it, he writes about his departing from Poland. And he writes, before departing from Poland, I was in a state of confusion resulting from the realization that not long ago, 3,500,000 Jews had lived in this Polish territory. At present, there remain 5,000 to 6,000 Jews, old, sick people. This was in the 80s. Fear possessed me, body and soul. My lips whispered quietly, the soul of Polish land deserves to be cursed because it's saturated with Jewish blood. A mystical divine hand had guided me to my shtetl, Jozef, turning me into a witness in order to meet the challenge of restoring and improving the condition of the Kedoshim brother grave, the Kever Achim. He went back to restore it, damaged by ferocious vandals. I'm sitting now in an airplane, which will take me via Switzerland to our Eretz Israel. Behind me was a land of deep-rooted hatred for the Jews, and that soil soaked with innocent Jewish blood. I now have a great deal of time to think. My brain is bursting with all kinds of thoughts about the suffering and pain I've recently experienced with my own eyes. I'm saturated with the tragic wartime experiences from which keep coming to my mind. I keep thinking, and I'm not able to come to any conclusion. It is frightening to relive all that once was once more, even in your mind. I keep coming up with the same results. We Jews are encircled by wild animals desiring to swallow their victims. Yesterday it was the German murderers with their sophisticated culture, quote unquote, which was supposed to win the world. Now the names have changed to the PLO, or peace speakers, followers of Stalin, and their slogans based on the liberation of the world, and euphemism which goes together with hatred for the Jews. In our America, obscure individuals are also rising up against us, mouthing their well-known philosophy of the Nazis. And now, the Chol Devador, Omdim Aleinu L'Chalutenu, has become a part of our lives. This idea is always prevalent among the nations, and we must constantly be on guard against it. Thank God, I have landed at the Lod airport, and with Israeli air once more in my lungs, my mood has changed completely. All troubles disappear, as with a magic wand. The sense of power one has in one's own land is rejuvenating and disperses my sense of inadequacy. Here in my Jewish homeland, the instrument of our future survival, I am filled with self-exaltation, renewed vitality and pride, and a sense of a future for our troubled people. Here, I feel that Lo Alman Yisrael, Israel is not left alone. And I see Am Yisrael Chai. My lips whisper a prayer to the Almighty that this should last forever more. Amen. Thank you. Rav, Avarachamim, Kol Marachamim, and mitzvot to end with Hatikva.
מלא רחמים, כנפי השכינה, עלות קדושים וטהורים כזאת, לשמור ישראל, אנשים וילדות, נשחטו, נשרפו, שנחנקו, שנתבעו, נתבעו חיים, וגנתי שם הקדושת השם. שם פעלים עילוי נשמות עיוור, לאחרים והאחרים אסתיהם ורצוע החיים את נשמותיהם, ויום מנוחתם, נחום שלום משכבם,
תם טקס יום השואה.